Regret is not born at the end of life. It is formed quietly, day by day, in the moments you name your fear instead of your faith. It grows each time you say, I can't, I shouldn't, what if it fails, and then call that caution, wisdom. Fear loves to be named, it gains authority when spoken. You may believe regret comes from mistakes, wrong choices, or missed chances, yet most regret is not caused by action, but by hesitation, by the life you postponed while waiting to feel safe, by the words you spoke that kept danger alive and possibility distant. Look closely at your ordinary language. Notice how often fear is announced before truth is given a chance. I'm afraid of losing. I don't want to get hurt. I can't risk it. These statements feel honest. They feel responsible. But they are declarations, and declarations shape destiny. Fear has no power until it is named. Unspoken, it passes like a shadow. Spoken, it becomes instruction. Each time you give it a name, you invite it to stay, to organize your choices, to design your future quietly, while you believe you are being careful. Picture yourself at a familiar crossroads. An opportunity appears. A conversation waits to be had. A desire presses gently from within. Then the old words rise automatically. What if this goes wrong? In that moment, fear is crowned and regret begins its work. The woman who lives without regret has learned something simple and severe. She does not deny fear, but she refuses to name it. She knows that naming gives it life, shape, and direction. Silence starves it. Right words replace it. Most people speak fear to feel relief. They think saying it out loud releases it. In truth, it engraves it. What is spoken repeatedly becomes believable. What is believed becomes habitual. What becomes habitual hardens into fate. Think of the nights you replay old moments, wondering what might have been different. The words you did not say, the steps you did not take, the version of yourself you sensed but never trusted enough to become. Regret is simply fear remembered too late. The law is exact. What you name, you nurture. What you nurture, you strengthen. And what you strengthen will one day demand acknowledgement. Fear named daily becomes regret yearly. Regret carried long enough becomes identity. You may say, but fear feels real. Of course it does. It is built from memory, imagination, and old experiences. But reality is not determined by feeling, it is shaped by agreement. Feeling follows belief, and belief follows repeated words. The woman who lives without regret speaks differently at the moment fear appears. She does not argue with it. She does not dramatize it. She simply refuses to give it language. She names something higher, instead order, protection, guidance, right action. This refusal feels uncomfortable at first. Fear protests when it loses its voice. The mind demands explanation. The body tightens. Yet this discomfort is not danger. It is the sound of an old habit losing control. Most regretful lives look reasonable from the outside. Safe choices, careful words, sensible restraint. Nothing dramatic goes wrong. And that is the tragedy. Nothing dramatic goes right either. Life remains polite, contained, and unfinished. Every time you name fear, you reinforce the belief that it deserves authority. You teach your inner world to listen to it first. Over time, courage grows quiet, desire dulls, and one day you wake realizing you have been loyal to fear longer than to truth. The woman without regret does not wait for fear to leave. She moves while it is present but unnamed. She understands that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear narrate the story. She does not say, I'm afraid this will fail. She says, I am guided to the right outcome. She does not say, I don't want to lose. She says, I am divinely protected. Her words do not deny reality, they select it. Notice how regret always speaks in hindsight. I wish I had tried. I wish I had trusted myself. I wish I had spoken. These wishes are delayed courage. Courage spoken on time has a different name. It is faith. Another year can pass this way. Another safe decision. Another swallowed desire. Another story you tell yourself about timing. Regret does not rush. It waits patiently for fear to finish leading. But the moment you stop naming fear, something shifts. The mind quiets. Choice becomes clearer. Action feels lighter. You realize fear had no strength of its own. It borrowed yours through attention and speech. This is why advice alone does not free people. Advice addresses behavior. Regret is formed much earlier, at the level of language. Change the words, and behavior reorganizes itself without force. You may feel exposed hearing this. That is a sign of truth. Fear prefers secrecy. It thrives when unexamined. Bringing awareness to the moment you name it is the beginning of release. Listen now, not to be comforted, but to be corrected. Correction is kindness when it prevents regret. Catch the next fearful sentence before it leaves your mouth. Replace it deliberately. Speak alignment instead of alarm. You do not need to become fearless to live without regret. You need to become disciplined in speech. Fear unnamed loses direction. Faith named gains momentum. Law follows the stronger voice every time. In the days ahead, notice how often fear tries to introduce itself. You will feel the urge to explain, to justify, to warn. Pause. Choose again. Name something higher. That single act rewrites more of your future than effort ever could. Regret is not your destiny. It is simply the echo of fear given too much language. Withdraw the words, and the echo fades. Speak differently now, while choice is still alive. That is how a woman lives without regret. Regret is not born in a single moment of failure, nor does it wait patiently until the end of life to reveal itself. It is formed quietly, day by day, in ordinary moments when fear is named and trusted, and faith is postponed. It grows unnoticed in the pauses between desire and decision, where caution is mistaken for wisdom and delay is praised as prudence. Most people believe regret comes from doing the wrong thing. This belief comforts them, for it suggests that regret is rare and dramatic. In truth, regret is most often caused by what was never done. It is created by the words spoken when opportunity appeared and fear was allowed to answer first. Fear does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself as danger. It often sounds reasonable, careful, even loving. It says, you should be careful. You don't want to lose what you have. This might not be the right time. These sentences feel protective. They are not. They are instructions. Each time fear is named, it gains authority. What is spoken is given form. What is given form begins to organize thought, behavior, and future choice. Fear unnamed passes through like a shadow. Fear named builds a dwelling place. The woman who lives with regret often appears sensible to the world. She makes careful choices. She avoids unnecessary risk. She explains her restraint with logic that satisfies others. Nothing visibly collapses, and that is the danger. Nothing visibly opens either. Regret thrives in lives that look reasonable from the outside. It does not require disaster. It only requires repeated hesitation. The slow refusal to act when the inner voice whispered, "Go forward," and fear replied, "Not yet." Most regretful lives are built politely. There is no rebellion, no great failure, no public loss. There is only the quiet accumulation of unlived moments. Opportunities decline gently, words unsaid, desires postponed until they grow faint. The law is exact. What you name, you nurture. What you nurture, you strengthen. And what you strengthen becomes your guide. Fear spoken daily becomes the architect of future decisions. Faith postponed becomes regret remembered. Many speak fear aloud, believing it will release tension. They say, "I'm afraid," thinking honesty will bring relief. Instead, honesty without wisdom engraves fear more deeply. What is spoken repeatedly becomes believable. What becomes believable becomes habitual. Habit becomes destiny. Look closely at ordinary language. Notice how often fear is announced before truth is allowed to speak. I can't risk it. I don't want to get hurt. What if it goes wrong? These sentences feel responsible, yet they crown fear as leader and teach the inner world to obey it. The woman who lives without regret has learned something simple and severe. She does not deny fear, but she refuses to name it. She knows that naming gives fear shape, direction, and power. Silence starves it. Right words replace it. This discipline feels uncomfortable at first. Fear protests when it loses its voice. The mind demands explanation. The body tightens. This discomfort is not danger. It is the sound of an old habit losing authority. Most people wait for fear to leave before acting. Fear rarely leaves on its own. It waits patiently for permission. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear narrate the story. Think of the nights when memory replays old crossroads. The words not spoken, the steps not taken, the self you sensed but never trusted enough to become. Regret is simply fear remembered too late. Regret always speaks in hindsight. I wish I had tried. I wish I had trusted myself. I wish I had spoken. These wishes are delayed courage. Courage spoken on time has a different name. It is faith. The woman without regret speaks differently at the moment fear appears. She does not argue with it. She does not dramatize it. She simply refuses to give it language. She names something higher instead. Guidance, protection, right action, divine order. She does not say, "I'm afraid this will fail." She says, "I am guided to the right outcome." She does not say, "I don't want to lose." She says, "I am divinely protected." Her words do not deny reality. They select it. Each time she chooses her words deliberately, the future adjusts slightly. One choice alone may seem small. Repetition gives it force. Law responds to consistency, not intensity. Many lives remain regretful, not because people lack courage, but because they never practiced it verbally. They waited for courage to appear as feeling. Feeling follows belief. Belief follows repeated words. Every time fear is named, courage grows quieter. Desire dulls. Initiative weakens. Over time, the inner voice that once urged expansion grows faint, and safety becomes the default. Safety prolonged becomes confinement. Another year can pass this way. Another sensible decision. Another desire swallowed. Another explanation about timing. Regret does not rush. It waits patiently for fear to finish leading. But the moment fear is no longer named, something shifts. The mind quiets. Choice becomes clearer. Action feels lighter. You realize fear had no strength of its own. It borrowed yours through attention and speech. Advice alone cannot prevent regret. Advice addresses behavior. Regret is formed much earlier. At the level of language, change the words, and behavior reorganizes itself without force. You may feel exposed hearing this. That is the sign of truth. Fear prefers secrecy. It thrives when unexamined. Awareness brings release. The correction is simple, though not easy. Catch the fearful sentence before it leaves your mouth. Replace it deliberately. Speak alignment instead of alarm. Speak faith instead of forecast. You do not need to become fearless to live without regret. You need only become disciplined in speech. Fear unnamed loses direction. Faith named gains momentum. Law follows the stronger voice every time. This is how regret is prevented, not at the end of life, but at the moment of choice, not through force, but through correction. Not through perfection, but through faith practiced daily. This is how a woman begins to live without regret. When the habit of naming fear is observed, another truth reveals itself with equal clarity. Words do not merely express thought, they create allegiance. Whatever is spoken repeatedly becomes familiar. Whatever is familiar becomes trusted, and whatever is trusted becomes the guide of life. Thus fear, once named often enough, begins to feel like wisdom. Many people believe fear is powerful by nature. It is not. Fear is weak until it is given language. Unspoken, it passes quickly. Spoken, it settles. Each word grants it weight, shape, and direction. Fear survives not because it is strong, but because it is allowed to speak first. The law is exact and impartial. It does not judge whether fear is justified. It does not weigh motive or circumstance. It responds to what is named most often. When fear is given language, law arranges experience to confirm it. When faith is named consistently, law does the same. The woman who lives without regret understands this deeply. She knows that fear spoken aloud is not release, but reinforcement. She no longer says, "I'm afraid," believing honesty requires confession. She knows that confession without correction becomes instruction. This does not mean she pretends fear is absent. Pretending creates strain. Instead, she observes fear without crowning it. She allows it to pass without speech. Silence, chosen deliberately, weakens fear's hold. Most people speak fear because it feels relieving in the moment. Sharing it lightens tension briefly. Yet the relief is temporary. The cost arrives later, quietly, as hesitation repeated and courage deferred. She notices how fear often disguises itself as concern for others. I don't want to disappoint. I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want to risk stability. These phrases sound generous. They are not. They are fear, speaking politely. Fear also borrows the language of responsibility. It says, I should be practical. I need to be realistic. Yet realism built on fear produces lives that are sensible, contained, and quietly unfulfilled. The woman without regret begins to recognize fear's voice regardless of disguise. She hears it when it says, "Wait, don't rock the boat. Be careful." She does not argue. Argument gives fear more time. She simply refuses to give it words. She understands now why courage feels unnatural at first. Fear has been rehearsed verbally for years. Courage has not. Courage feels unfamiliar because it has not yet been spoken consistently. The inner voice that urges expansion grows stronger only when it is named. Silence starves fear, but naming faith nourishes courage. Both are required. She practices this discipline daily. When fear rises, she pauses before speech. The pause alone breaks momentum. In that pause, she chooses which voice will lead. She does not say, "I'm scared this will go wrong." She says, "I am guided in right action." She does not say, "I don't know if I can handle this." She says, "I am equal to what is before me." These are not affirmations meant to soothe emotion. They are declarations meant to instruct law. At first, these words feel strange. Fear protests. The body tightens. The mind demands proof. This discomfort is not failure. It is the old allegiance weakening. Others notice the change before outcomes shift. They sense steadiness in her speech. She no longer narrates worst-case outcomes. She no longer invites agreement with fear. Her presence becomes quieter, yet more decisive. People say she seems confident. She knows confidence followed obedience. Obedience to right speech created confidence, not the reverse. She sees now why many intelligent, capable people live with regret. Intelligence does not prevent fear from speaking. Capability does not silence doubt. Without discipline of language, fear remains the dominant narrator. Fear named repeatedly becomes believable. Belief becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. Identity becomes destiny. This chain operates silently and faithfully. The woman interrupts the chain early. She does not wait for fear to mature into decision. She stops it at speech. Speech is the doorway through which belief enters. She also understands why regret feels so heavy later in life. Regret is not merely sadness. It is the weight of many moments where fear was trusted over truth. Each moment seemed small. Together, they form a burden. Correction now feels urgent, but not desperate. She knows that time responds to alignment immediately. Years can be redeemed through right understanding. 10 years are lost through habitual fear language. Another 10 through silence where faith should have spoken. 30 years through loyalty to caution over calling. Correction returns them in compressed form. She no longer fears making mistakes. Mistakes corrected early cost little. Fear trusted repeatedly costs everything. Others begin to follow her example without instruction. They speak more carefully around her. They pause before naming fear. Authority teaches silently. She understands now that the power of naming is the power of choosing allegiance. Each word is a vote. Fear or faith. Retraction or expansion. Delay or direction. Law follows the majority vote without argument. This is why discipline of speech is not optional. For a life without regret, it is foundational. Behavior follows belief. Belief follows words. Words are chosen or neglected. She chooses deliberately now. Fear still appears. It always will. But it no longer speaks freely. It no longer organizes the future. It no longer writes the story. That authority has been reclaimed. And with it, the path toward a life without regret becomes clear and steady. There is a mistaken belief held by many that safety is the opposite of regret. They assume that careful living prevents sorrow and that restraint preserves peace. Yet the law reveals a paradox that is uncomfortable to face. The lives most free from visible error often carry the deepest regret. Nothing shattered them. Nothing failed loudly. Nothing forced change. And so nothing truly began. Fear prefers safety because safety requires no declaration of faith. Safety allows fear to remain unnamed while still obeyed. It speaks in reasonable tones and dresses itself as wisdom. It persuades quietly, asking only that one delay, soften desire, or choose what is familiar over what is true. The woman who later lives with regret often recalls how sensible her choices once seemed. She did not act rashly, she did not offend, she did not risk embarrassment. Each decision could be explained clearly to others. Each step was approved by logic. And yet, something within her slowly dimmed. Regret does not announce itself during these moments. It waits. It allows life to proceed smoothly enough. It accumulates patiently while desire is postponed and courage deferred. By the time regret speaks, the pattern feels complete. Many safe lives look successful from the outside. There is stability, approval, and predictability. Yet inwardly, there is a quiet sense of something unfinished, a faint knowing that life was meant to be larger, truer, more expressive. This knowing, ignored long enough, becomes sorrow. Safety feels virtuous because it avoids pain, yet safety practiced without faith avoids joy as well. Fear does not merely protect from loss, it prevents gain, and the loss of unlived potential weighs more heavily than any mistake made in courage. The law responds not to safety, but to alignment. Alignment sometimes asks for risk, not reckless risk, but risk that follows inner guidance rather than outer approval. When this guidance is silenced repeatedly, the inner voice grows faint. The woman who understands this sees that regret is not born from bold errors. It is born from careful refusals. Each time, fear was allowed to speak first. Courage withdrew slightly. Over time, withdrawal became habit. Habit became identity. Others praised her restraint. They called her responsible. They admired her composure. Yet admiration did not quiet the unrest within. Praise cannot substitute for fulfillment. Fear loves sensible language. It prefers phrases such as, "This isn't practical. It's not the right time. I should be grateful for what I have." Gratitude used to silence calling becomes fear disguised as virtue. The woman who lives without regret learns to distinguish between contentment and resignation. Contentment rests in trust. Resignation withdraws desire. The two feel similar, but their fruit is opposite. She notices how many people speak of dreams in the past tense. I used to want, I once thought about. These phrases reveal courage postponed until it dissolved. Dreams denied politely do not vanish. They wait. Waiting too long is the great danger. Opportunity has seasons. Inner prompting speaks when action is possible. When repeatedly ignored, it grows quieter, not because it was wrong, but because it was dishonored. The woman sees now why safe lives often reach crossroads later than necessary. They avoided danger, but they also avoided truth. Truth requires movement. Movement requires courage. Courage demands that fear not be crowned. She recalls moments when she felt the clear urging to speak, act, or choose differently. Each time fear answered, and she listened. Nothing terrible happened, and that was the tragedy. Nothing transformative happened either. Regret grows strongest in lives where fear was obeyed without consequence, where avoidance was rewarded, where safety was applauded. The law does not punish safety. It simply reflects its limits. The woman who lives without regret understands that safety without faith becomes confinement. Protection without guidance becomes restraint. Order without expansion becomes stagnation. She begins now to see courage differently. Courage is not drama. It is quiet obedience to inner truth. While fear remains unnamed, courage does not announce itself. It proceeds. Others may still call her careful, yet she knows she has shifted allegiance. Fear no longer decides. Faith speaks first. She understands now that regret is not caused by wrong action, but by the refusal to act when guided. That refusal, repeated, creates a life that feels smaller than it was meant to be. This realization is not meant to accuse, but to awaken. Awareness restores choice. Choice restores direction. Direction redeems time. She sees now how many years were lost choosing safety over truth. 10 years of waiting, 20 years of explaining, 30 years of believing there would be a better time. That time never arrives. Action creates time. The woman who understands law chooses differently now. She still moves wisely, but no longer cautiously. Wisdom listens to guidance. Caution listens to fear. Others notice the change. They say she seems more alive, more present, more expressive. They may not understand why. They only feel the difference. This difference is alignment reclaimed. Regret dissolves not through mourning the past, but through honoring guidance now. Each moment courage is spoken. the future reshapes itself. Law responds immediately to obedience. This is why safe lives, though admired, often ache quietly, and why courageous lives, though imperfect, rest peacefully. The woman without regret chooses truth over safety. She speaks faith before fear. She moves while guidance is alive, and in doing so, she prevents regret before it is born. The moment fear appears is the only moment in which regret can be prevented. Not later, not after reflection, not once courage has been summoned through effort. Regret is decided at the instant fear attempts to speak, and is either granted language or refused it. That instant is small, ordinary, and easily overlooked, yet it carries the full weight of destiny. Most people believe fear must be overcome before action can occur. This belief is false. Fear does not need to be overcome. It needs to be silenced. What is not spoken loses direction. What loses direction loses power. Fear unnamed cannot organize the future. The woman who lives without regret understands this discipline precisely. She does not argue with fear, for argument dignifies it. She does not deny fear, for denial strengthens resistance. She simply refuses to let fear speak first. That refusal alone alters the course of events. Fear is impatient. It rushes to name outcomes, to predict loss, to justify delay. It knows that once it finishes its sentence, law will obey. Speed is fear's greatest weapon. Awareness is its undoing. The pause before speech becomes sacred. In that pause, allegiance is chosen. The old habit urges immediate explanation. The new discipline waits just long enough to choose truth instead. One breath is often sufficient. School trained the mind to respond quickly, to answer, to explain. This training works against spiritual authority. Authority does not hurry. It speaks deliberately and rests. When fear rises, the woman feels the familiar tightening. The body reacts before the mind understands. She does not mistake this sensation for guidance. Feeling was never meant to lead. Feeling follows instruction when instruction is steady. She notices how often fear demands to be shared. It urges confession. I'm scared this will fail. I don't know if I can do this. These sentences feel relieving when spoken. Relief is temporary. The cost arrives later, as hesitation hardened. Instead, she chooses replacement. Replacement is more powerful than resistance. She replaces fear's language with truth's declaration. She does not soften it with apology. She does not decorate it with emotion. She states it and proceeds. She says, I am guided to right action. She says, I am divinely protected. She says, the way opens clearly before me. These words are not spoken to convince emotion. They are spoken to instruct law. At first, these words feel hollow. Fear protests. The mind doubts. This does not mean the words are weak. It means fear is losing its accustomed authority. Resistance always increases briefly before dissolving. The discipline is practiced repeatedly. Fear returns often. Each return is another opportunity to refuse it language. Practice strengthens authority. Authority grows through use, not preparation. Others notice the change gradually. They hear fewer explanations. They hear fewer warnings. They sense steadiness where there was once caution. This steadiness is not bravado. It is clarity maintained. People may ask why she is so calm. She does not explain. Explanation invites debate. Debate weakens certainty. Certainty rests. She understands now why regret accumulates in lives where fear was explained rather than replaced. Explanation teaches fear to return more eloquently next time. Replacement ends the conversation. She recalls moments in the past when she explained fear thoroughly, believing understanding would free her. Understanding, without correction, only refined hesitation. Fear grew articulate. Now she stops fear at the doorway. She does not invite it inside for discussion. Silence, paired with right declaration, closes the door firmly. This practice feels unnatural to many because fear was allowed to narrate life for years. Narration felt like participation. Participation felt like control. Control was illusion. Law does not require narration, it requires instruction. She sees now that fear often disguised itself as humility. Who am I to try? I don't want to assume. This humility was fear seeking permission. True humility trusts guidance rather than personal limitation. Replacing fear with truth does not guarantee comfort. Comfort was never the promise, alignment was. Alignment produces peace later, not necessarily immediately. The woman no longer seeks reassurance after speaking truth. Reassurance would imply doubt. She allows law to respond without interference. Others may still live by fear's narration. They may caution her. They may warn her. She listens politely without agreement. Agreement is what empowers, not exposure. She understands now that regret does not come from fear felt, but from fear obeyed. Fear obeyed repeatedly becomes life's director. Fear felt but unnamed fades quickly. This discipline changes how time behaves. Decisions that once took years of inner debate now resolve quickly. Action follows speech naturally. Momentum replaces stagnation. She sees now how many years were lost allowing fear to finish its sentences. 10 years explaining, 20 years delaying, 30 years believing courage would come later. Courage comes when fear is refused speech. The law responds immediately to the stronger voice. When faith speaks consistently, fear loses audience. When fear loses audience, regret loses foundation. This practice is not dramatic. It is quiet, exact, and daily. Its power lies in repetition. The woman who masters this discipline does not live recklessly. She lives freely. Freedom is not the absence of boundaries. It is the presence of right direction. Regret cannot form where fear is denied language. It has no material with which to build. Thus, at the moment fear appears and is refused speech, the future changes. Not gradually, immediately. This is the discipline that ends regret before it begins. There is a law that never argues, never hesitates, and never explains itself. It moves with exact obedience to the voice most often heard within. This law does not weigh intention against repetition. It does not measure sincerity against habit. It follows the dominant agreement without emotion or preference. Most people believe life responds to effort, prayer, or circumstance. They do not see that life responds first to command. Command is not force. It is the direction established through repeated speech and belief. What is spoken most consistently becomes the authority law obeys. Fear gains its influence not through strength, but through frequency. It speaks often, quickly, and without challenge. Faith, left unspoken, remains potential only. Law cannot act on what is admired silently. It acts on what is named steadily. The woman who lives without regret understands that law responds to the stronger voice, not the wiser one, not the kinder one, but the one repeated without contradiction. Repetition is the language law understands best. Many speak faith occasionally and fear habitually. They wonder why fear dominates experience. Law simply followed instruction. Law never intended harm. It obeyed exactly. She sees now why wishing never changed anything. Wishing has no authority. It hopes without command. Law requires direction, not desire. She understands also why emotional prayer often fails to produce result. Emotion fluctuates. Law responds to what remains constant. Constancy carries authority. The woman chooses carefully which voice will become constant. She does not attempt to silence fear through force. Force creates conflict. Conflict scatters power. She replaces fear's repetition with faith's repetition. At first, fear protests loudly. It senses loss of position. It demands attention. Attention once granted strengthened it. Attention withdrawn weakens it. She continues speaking faith calmly, even when emotion has not yet followed. Feeling always lags behind belief. Belief forms through repetition of words, accepted as true. Others notice that she does not argue circumstances anymore. Argument implied resistance. Resistance slowed response. Acceptance of law speeds it. People say she seems aligned. Alignment is simply agreement without contradiction. Law rushes to meet alignment. She understands now why regret accumulates where fear spoke consistently and faith appeared only in moments of crisis. Crisis faith is too late. Law has already been instructed. She no longer waits for crisis to speak truth. She speaks truth daily, calmly, without drama. Drama once fed fear. Calm starves it. This discipline produces visible change. Decisions become easier. Outcomes soften. Obstacles dissolve with less effort. Others call it fortune. She calls it obedience. She also understands why correction must be gentle. Harsh correction speaks conflict. Conflict divides instruction. Law pauses where division exists. She corrects herself quietly. When she hears fear speak, she replaces it without judgment. Judgment would strengthen the error. Replacement removes it. She sees now how many lives remain trapped, not by misfortune, but by divided speech. They say one thing and believe another. Law waits until clarity appears. Clarity is achieved through repetition, not intensity. A quiet truth spoken daily outperforms a passionate declaration spoken once. She notices how her language has simplified. Complexity once disguised doubt. Simplicity reveals certainty. Law loves simplicity. Others feel this simplicity as peace. They trust her instinctively. Trust flows toward authority naturally. She understands now why people who complain often feel stuck. Complaint repeats what is. Repetition instructs law to continue. She does not complain. Not because she suppresses feeling, but because she knows complaint feeds what it names. The law responds immediately when the stronger voice changes. Results may appear gradually, but the response begins at once. Delay belongs to old momentum, not new instruction. She understands now how years are redeemed. 10 years lost through fearful repetition are restored through faithful declaration. 20 years through disciplined alignment, 30 years through mastery. Time obeys law as surely as circumstance does. The woman who understands this does not live perfectly. Perfection is unnecessary. She lives consciously. Conscious speech directs life. Fear still appears, but it no longer commands. Faith speaks first. Law listens. This is why regret dissolves. Regret required law's obedience to fear over time. When fear loses voice, regret loses foundation. She rests now, not in hope, but in understanding. And understanding, once practiced, cannot be undone. Living without regret is not the result of a single brave decision, nor is it the reward of an exceptional temperament. It is the fruit of a daily discipline practiced quietly, often unnoticed by others, and sometimes even unnoticed by oneself. It is built not through dramatic action, but through consistent allegiance to truth over fear. The woman who lives without regret does not feel fearless. Fear still visits. What has changed is her relationship to it. Fear no longer directs. It no longer narrates. It no longer interprets events. It appears, is recognized, and is refused authority. This refusal, practiced daily, becomes freedom. She understands now that regret was never her enemy. Regret was instruction delayed. It revealed where fear had once spoken unchecked. With understanding, regret loses its sting. It becomes a teacher whose lesson has finally been learned. She no longer measures her life by the absence of mistakes. Mistakes corrected early leave little trace. The true cost was always hesitation uncorrected. Now she acts when guided, even if the way is not yet clear. Clarity follows obedience, not the other way around. Others notice that she moves differently through life. There is less apology in her voice, less explanation, less need to justify her choices. She does not persuade, she proceeds. Proceeding with quiet confidence is often mistaken for certainty of outcome. In truth, it is certainty of guidance. She has learned that guidance does not shout. It speaks gently and briefly. Fear shouts because it must convince. Guidance assumes obedience. When guidance is honored repeatedly, it grows clearer. When ignored, it grows faint. The woman without regret honors guidance immediately. She does not wait for full assurance. Assurance grows through movement. Each step taken in faith strengthens the next instruction. She no longer rehearses what might go wrong. Rehearsal trained fear. She rehearses alignment instead. She speaks order where confusion once lived. She speaks protection where danger once imagined itself. This practice alters memory itself. The past no longer appears as a series of missed chances, but as preparation. Preparation without correction becomes delay. Preparation with correction becomes foundation. She notices now that her nights are quieter. Regret once spoke most loudly in the dark. Now the mind rests. Rest is a sign of alignment restored. Others feel safe confiding in her. Safety gathers around those who do not panic inwardly. Panic scatters. Calm collects. She understands now why so many lives feel unfinished. Not because opportunity was absent, but because courage was postponed. Courage postponed dissolves. Courage practice strengthens. She no longer waits for the perfect moment. Perfection is fear, dressed as patience. She moves when guided, trusting law to complete what she begins. Time responds differently now. Years no longer slip away unnoticed. Each day carries intention. Intention directs experience. Experience confirms belief. She sees clearly that regret-free living is not loud. It does not require announcement. It produces quiet satisfaction rather than excitement. Excitement fades. Satisfaction remains. She also understands that this discipline must be maintained. Old habits attempt return. Fear looks for openings. Awareness closes them. When she hears herself about to explain fear, she pauses. When she feels the urge to justify hesitation, she replaces it with faith. These moments are small, but they are decisive. Others may still live in regret. She does not judge them. Judgment strengthens separation. She demonstrates instead. Demonstration teaches silently. She knows now that every day offers dozens of small chances to choose courage. Courage practiced in small matters prepares one for larger ones. Courage neglected in small matters fails when it is most needed. This is why regret-free living is not heroic. It is faithful. She understands now that faith is not belief in outcome, but trust in order. Order does not fail, only obedience wavers. Her life is not perfect. Perfection was never promised. What has been restored is peace. Peace is the absence of inner conflict. Regret cannot exist where peace resides. Regret requires divided allegiance. Peace signals unity. She lives now from unity. Thought, word, and action move together. Law responds quickly to unity. Others see her as confident, centered, fulfilled. She knows she is simply aligned. She no longer fears looking back. The past no longer accuses. It instructs gently and releases. She also no longer fears the future. The future is not unknown. It is being written daily through speech and choice. Living without regret is not a destination reached once. It is a manner of walking. Each day, fear appears. Each day, fear is refused speech. Each day, faith is named. Each day, law obeys. This is how regret dissolves before it forms. This is how a woman lives fully. This is how a life is completed without sorrow. When a woman has learned to live without regret, she discovers something unexpected. Life grows simpler, not smaller, but clearer. The inner struggle that once accompanied choice dissolves, and action begins to follow understanding as naturally as breath follows life. What once felt like effort now feels like order restored. She sees that regret was never an enemy sent to punish her. It was a messenger that arrived when fear had spoken too long without correction. Once the message is understood, the messenger departs. Regret has no purpose where awareness lives. Looking back, she no longer judges herself harshly for moments of hesitation. Judgment would divide her again. Instead, she blesses those moments for what they taught her. Each delay revealed the cost of fear. Each ache pointed toward truth. Nothing was wasted once it was understood. She understands now that the past cannot imprison a woman who has reclaimed authority in the present. Memory loses its power to wound when it is no longer used as evidence against oneself. The past becomes instruction, not accusation. Many believe freedom comes from changing circumstance. In truth, freedom comes from changing allegiance. When allegiance shifts from fear to faith, circumstance reorganizes without struggle. Life responds quickly to inner unity. She notices that her desires no longer feel dangerous. Desire once frightened her because it demanded movement. Now desire feels natural, even gentle. Desire is guidance in motion when fear no longer distorts it. Others sense this change, even if they cannot name it. They say she seems at peace. They feel less compelled to advise her, caution her, or protect her from herself. Peace disarms interference. She no longer seeks permission to live fully. Permission once delayed action. She understands that right action authorizes itself when it follows guidance. Guidance does not need approval. Her speech remains disciplined, but it is no longer effortful. Discipline has become habit. Habit has become character. Character directs destiny quietly. She still encounters uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer alarms her. Alarm belonged to fear. Uncertainty now feels like space into which order will move. She understands now why regret once felt so heavy. Regret carried the weight of unexpressed life. Life expressed freely feels light, even when challenges arise. The future no longer feels like something to survive. It feels like something to participate in consciously. Participation replaces waiting. Waiting without fear becomes trust. She sees now that living without regret does not mean living without sorrow. Sorrow may come through loss or change. Regret is different. Regret is sorrow mixed with self-betrayal. When self-betrayal ends, sorrow passes cleanly. She has ended self-betrayal by choosing faith repeatedly. Faith chosen daily becomes strength. Strength produces peace. Others may still ask her how she became so certain. She does not answer with explanation. Explanation would suggest effort. She answers with example. Example teaches without argument. She understands now that courage does not shout. It stands quietly and proceeds. The world often confuses noise with strength. Strength rests. The law continues to respond to her as it always has, exactly, impartially, faithfully. What has changed is the instruction she gives. Her words are fewer. Her meaning is clearer. Her life reflects this clarity. She no longer fears reaching the end of life and looking back. Looking back now feels kind. The path behind her makes sense. The path ahead feels guided. This is the true reward of living without regret. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of peace. Peace that does not depend upon outcome. Peace that follows alignment. Each day still offers choices. Each day still presents fear at the doorway. The difference is that fear is no longer crowned. Faith answers first. Law follows. And so her life continues not perfectly, but faithfully. Not loudly, but fully. Not free of challenge, but free of regret. This is not a gift reserved for a few. It is a discipline available to any woman willing to guard her words, honor her guidance, and choose truth over fear again and again. When this discipline is practiced, life responds gently and the heart rests. This is how regret ends. This is how life begins anew. This is how a woman lives whole.